Hello everybody, Alex, also known as Solanus Dracone here, and welcome back to All Things Lord of the Rings. So, when last we left off, humans had come onto the scene. They were greeted warmly by the Noldor, less so by the Teleri, and spread out across Beleriand. Many of them had sworn themselves to the service of the Elven Kings, and got to live in their own places and look after themselves. The Noldor and humans got along swimmingly. Humans helped swell the ranks of the defenses against the Dark Lord, and I like to think that the elves enjoyed having someone to teach. Since things were going so well, Fingolfin began to ask around the other elven houses to see if anybody maybe wanted to try to shore up their siege of Angband. They had Morgoth pretty well covered on the south, the west, and the east, but they didn't really have anyone north of Angband to watch that area. That's where most of the Orcish attacks had come from. That was the only safe way out for the forces of Morgoth. But Fingolfin didn't really get a lot of support for that, because most of the elves of Beleriand thought life was pretty sweet as it was. The good times are here. They're sure to last. One winter, on a moonless night, a normal night, a night like any other, the guardsmen of the uppermost watches over Angband weren't really paying much attention. Same shit, different day. Morgoth hadn't done anything for the whole time they've been there. Why should he start now? Suddenly Morgoth Part 2, The Revenge. The Dark Lord had not been idle these 400 or so years. All this time he had been preparing, getting a beautiful surprise party organized for his so-called jailers. That routine, boring, moonless night got brutal. Absolutely massive tsunami levels of lava poured forth from Thangorodrim at a screechingly fast rate. The entire plain of Ard Galen, which surrounded Thangorodrim and led all the way south to the Dorthonion, was completely covered. It became a choking wasteland of dust and ash, devoid of all life, completely barren. From then on, the fields of Ard Galen were named to Anfauglith, the gasping dust. A large amount of Noldor, and presumably humans as well, were killed in that eruption, while the Ered Wethrin, which were the mountains surrounding Hithlum, and the hills of Dorthonion kept the blaze from going much further. All the trees on the slopes facing Thangorodrim were torched, and the smoky haze this created had thrown the defenders into confusion. Thus began the fourth great battle of Beleriand, Dagor Bragollach, the Battle of Sudden Flame. There was another surprise, though. I told you guys, Morgoth had prepared for this. Glaurung, the great-granddaddy of all dragons, was fully grown now. He was no whelp of a fire drake any longer. This bastard got swole. And he didn't come alone. Orcs and Balrogs came out to play as well, in numbers inconceivable, and began to murder it up. They attacked the fortresses of the Noldor and killed thousands upon thousands of elves of all variety, and humans, and they attacked all through the winter. It is safe to say the siege of Angband was broken. From that day forward, Beleriand was in a constant state of war. The good days were over. The only reason Dagor Bragollach ended was because the attacking forces thinned out a bit in the spring. Needless to say, not everybody was sticking around for that party. Most of the Grey Elves were done with this war, and so they took off, abandoning the battle and running away, at least in some part, to Doriath, because the girdle of Melian was still plenty strong enough to keep out evil. Thingol became the king of a lot more people in those frantic days. Other elves holed up in Nargothrond, or took refuge in the fortresses by the sea, or fled to Osirian, or just flat out left Beleriand. Anything to get away from this shit. Even as far away as the eastern lands of Middle-earth, people had heard about this battle. Finarfin came out the worst from the assault. He lost his sons, Angrod and Agnor. Also, quite a few of the humans were lost in this battle, including Bragollach, the current chieftain of the House of Beor. Finrod was hauling ass back to Nargothrond, but he got pinned in by a company of orcs. He was saved at the last second by a human named Barahir, who brought a bunch of spearmen to help the Felagund escape. Finrod was mighty thankful for this, and he swore an oath of lasting friendship to Barahir and his people, and gave him a ring as a token of this. Remember elves and oaths? Yeah, binding. Barahir became the king of the House of Beor, because his brother Bragollach was mighty dead. The fighting outside of Hithlum got hot, and Hador the Golden-Haired was one of the casualties, along with his second son Gundor, both arrowed most heavily. Hador's older son Galdor wore the pants for the House of Hador from then on. The elves and humans of Hithlum managed to beat back the attack, but with disastrous losses. Hithlum was spared, but Fingolfin was cut off from any kind of help whatsoever. The sons of Fëanor didn't do much better. Celegorm and Curufin had to hoof it, so they went to Nargothrond to join forces with Finrod. Maedhros fought like a beast on steroids, and managed to hold the Hill of Himring against the attack with the help of the people who rallied to him, including his brother Maglor. But all around them, shit was being broken through. They almost managed to hold Maglor's gap, but Glaurung came through and raffle-stomped all over that. Thargelion was fucked, and Caranthir the shit-talker hightailed it out of there and joined up with his brothers Amrod and Amras. Together, they holed up in Amon Ereb and managed to defend Osiriand. As Fingolfin began to hear about the losses, that the sons of Finarfin were killed and the sons of Fëanor had fled, he started to feel like this was the end days, and that the Noldor were utterly fucked. He was 100% pissed off now, and he got on his armor, jumped on his horse, and rode right the fuck up to the gates of Angband, completely on his own, and challenged Morgoth to single combat. And Morgoth came. He didn't come entirely willingly, however. He was justifiably scared. He was the only Valar who could feel fear. But he had to accept this challenge, or else his captains would think he was a pussy. Fingolfin was blowing his horn like a World Cup vuvuzela and yelling all kinds of good shit down into Angband. So Morgoth took up his big-ass mace Grond and his big black shield and his thick black armor and came out, his footsteps shaking the very ground. Fingolfin was armored with silver and his blue shield set with crystals, and he had a sword called Ringil that glittered like ice. It was on. Morgoth swung Grond, but Fingolfin dodged, a mighty pit left in the earth where he had just been. Swing after swing of the great mace, dodge after dodge from Fingolfin. 7 good hits the king of the Noldor landed, and Morgoth screamed like a bitch each time. But Fingolfin got tired eventually, and Morgoth slammed him 3 times with his shield, breaking Fingolfin's armor, the elf lord getting up each time, but getting weaker, the ground getting harder to stand on from all the violence. He stumbled, and Morgoth put his left foot upon Fingolfin's neck, crushing it. With his last ounce of strength, Fingolfin slashed at Morgoth's foot, seriously wounding the Dark Lord, blood gushing forth and filling up the holes that Grond had made before the king of the Noldor finally perished. Morgoth was about to just desecrate the body, but Thorondor, the Lord of all Eagles, jumped off his perch in the Chrysogrim, which were the mountains surrounding Gondolin, and snatched dead Fingolfin up, but not before giving Morgoth's face a good disfiguring clawing. He brought the body to a good high mountain with a view of Gondolin, and Turgon came and buried his deceased father under a good high mound of stones, and there was much lamentation in Hithlum. The lordship of the Noldor fell to Fingon now. As for Morgoth, the wounds that he had suffered from the fight never healed, ever, and he now had a permanent limp. He never came out of the gates of Angband again. There was no celebration among the orcs, because their big boss man got beaten up pretty bad, and the elves never sang of the battle, for their sorrow was too great. Still, Morgoth now held the northern lands of Beleriand. I'm going to close this episode up by telling about one more story of tragedy during it all. Barahir, the new lord of the House of Beor, refused to flee from Dorthonion. He fought for every fucking foot of land, but sadly, Morgoth had sent too much, and bit by bit, Barahir's forces were cut down until only a few remained. All the forests on the northward slopes of that land were little by little turned into an area of such dread and fear that people named that area Delduath in Sindarin, and in human speech, Tar Nufuin, the forest under Nightshade. Barahir's case was so bad that his wife, Emeldir the Man-Hearted, gathered up all the women and children and put weapons in the hands of any who would wield them, and led them to Brethil through these terrible paths, where the Halidin took them in for the most part, while the rest went to Dor Lomin and the people of Galdor, Hador's son. As for Barahir, eventually there were only 12 men left to him. They couldn't keep up the fight anymore, and they couldn't escape. There was nothing left to them. Their homes had been destroyed, their wives and children either killed, captured, or fled. No help could come from Hithlum, and so Barahir and his men were hunted like wild beasts. They retreated to the barren highlands above the forest, and wandered among the lakes and moors of that region, like outlaws, sleeping on the ground with no roof except the sky. I'm only going to name one of those 12 men who were with him, his son, Beren. And that's where I'm going to have to cut it. I know, I'm sorry, I said that I would try to cover a chapter in a sitting, but by Eru there's so much stuff that's happening, and this part alone was almost 1,900 words. The last episode was over 3,700 words. That's more than is required for a college-level English thesis. I can't do that every week. The end of the chapter will come next week, and after that, a very special episode. So, I want to thank you all for watching. Once again, I am Alex, also known as Solanus Dracone, and this has been All Things Lord of the Rings. Goodbye.